So what happens when you take the RTX 3080 and you make it so cheap it becomes a shell of its former self? The 3050. That's what you get. Now don't get me wrong, this card actually has quite a few redeeming qualities. It has dedicated ray tracing hardware, low power draw, the best super sampling software out there, and enough memory lanes where it runs at full speed, even on slower computers. But it could have been so good with just a few small, vital tweaks. If you're looking for a safe place to buy cheap RTX and RX video cards, then check out the Newegg Refreshed program. They offer good deals on all kinds of electronics, but they have some pretty insane ones on video cards, like this 5700 XT for $110, or this RX 6600 for $160, or 6700 XT for $240. All products have been inspected, tested, cleaned, and come with a 90-day return policy. While you're on Newegg, you can check out their new PC Builder tool to match your refreshed video card. They even have an AI option that automatically builds you a system based on a prompt that you give. So if you're interested in more affordable tech, or you just want a free tool to help you out with your PC builds, then check out newegg.com. Both links will be in the description. Thank you guys so much for sponsoring. Let's start with the 3050's strengths. Firstly, it has phenomenal power draw. It does not require any power supply cables, and it's currently the fastest video card in the world to do so. Compared to my Intel Arc A580, its direct price competitor, it consumes half the power, and that's a feat of engineering. This makes the 3050 a great candidate for office computer upgrades. And if you want to see a video on that, just let me know. Unfortunately, that's where the greatness ends and the mediocrity begins. I actually don't think the 3050 is awful at $170, but unless I needed it for a specific use case, like the low profile model, I wouldn't spend any more than that. Secondly, it only has 6 gigs of VRAM. Both the A580 and RX 6600 have 8 gigs of VRAM for around the same price, so it makes the 3050 seem a little bit silly. But at the end of the day, performance doesn't lie, and I admit that the 3050 can play games at 1080p. My test computer includes the Ryzen 5 3500X and the Ryzen 5 5600X CPUs. I used both to see if there are any bottlenecks with either processor. Both processors had the Wraith Stealth CPU cooler, 16 gigs of DDR4 memory, and a 512 gig NVMe M.2 SSD. They were powered by a 500 watt PowerSpec power supply and were housed inside the Thermaltake Versa H18 case. I tested the 3050 with resizable bar on and off, but there wasn't a difference. In a vacuum, the 3050 did a great job. Like I mentioned earlier, it can play games at 1080p, and depending on your expectations, it'll do exactly what you want it to do. Thankfully, the Ryzen 5 3500X CPU had nearly identical performance across almost every game compared to the 5600X CPU, and that's a good sign for budget gamers. It means that if you're still on an older AM4 processor, or even as old as Intel's Haswell processors, you might have enough CPU power to feed the 3050. The 3050 even completed the Cyberpunk ray tracing benchmark on medium settings. Now the only exception here was Fortnite. With its new UE5 update, it's actually a pretty intense CPU hog. Now the cool part here is energy efficiency. The entire computer consumed under 200 watts when the 5600X was paired with the 3050. Like I said, the 3050 in and of itself is quite a feat of engineering, but unfortunately we cannot consider it in a vacuum. Firstly, the A580 drivers definitely have higher overhead, which means that with slower processors, it takes a bigger performance hit than the 3050. So with the 3500X, the A580 actually matches the 3050. This is true regardless of whether we include Cyberpunk's ray tracing benchmark in its aggregate score. Since the A580 and the 3050 are the same price, their value is essentially the same as well. But when we upgrade to the 5600X processor, we see that the A580 is about a tier faster than the 3050. On average, it's 23% faster in pure rasterization and about 50% faster in the single ray tracing benchmark. There are exceptions to this, like Fortnite, the 3050 performs better regardless of the processor. And this lines up with the expectations because Fortnite has traditionally performed better on Nvidia cards. You pay 30 cents more per frame with the 3050 compared to the Intel Arc A580 when we don't have a CPU bottleneck. In other words, the RTX 3050 needs to be $136 to match the A580's price to performance ratio. And that leads me to the conclusion of this card. Nvidia priced this card right at the border of okay and bad. It's not a good card, but purchasing makes sense under the right circumstances. And that stinks. What stinks even more is that this card could have been great. If they priced it at $140 USD, it would match the value of the A580, and it would be an immediate recommendation when you compare it against its competition, the 6500 XT and the RX 6400. Add 2 more gigs of VRAM, it's a wonderful card. But instead, Nvidia settled for just okay. While I don't think the 3050 is a great addition to the RTX family, I can see justification for its purchase. If you need the energy efficiency or you need its form factor, it makes sense, unfortunately. But if you don't, then I recommend the A580, picking up a used GPU, or checking out Newegg's refresh program because you will find a better card, and it might even be cheaper as well. But that's it for this video, guys. What do you think of the 3050? And do you want me to try and upgrade a pre-built and see if it's a good choice? Comment down below. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.